Hello and welcome to episode 81. And today we're not really comparing microphones, we're comparing where to stick them on an acoustic guitar. The reason for this is because there's been loads of chat on one of the forums recently, and I figured what we should really do is try and do a video that lets people hear what they're seeing. Now, what do I mean by that? What I've done is prepare a little experiment. So I've got an AKG C451 condenser and I've got my ropey old acoustic guitar, and I thought what we'd do is give you the sound of all these positions that people talk about. So you'll see things like, oh yeah, if you put the microphone on the sound hole, you get a very deep, dark sound. Well, what does a deep, dark sound like? I figured if we just use one microphone and put it in different positions, you can judge for yourself what the words mean. And that probably makes more sense than just reading about it. So the test conditions. Okay, well, I'm quite close in to my acoustic guitar. Now, I wouldn't normally on this guitar go in that close because it's not a particularly nice guitar. Some notes tend to jump out at you. Other notes tend to be a little bit muted. It's just, I don't know how much I prefer. I can't remember how much I paid. It wasn't a huge amount of money, and it certainly is not by any sense a classic guitar. But it is probably a very common guitar. So what have we got? In this picture, which has got the camera on the side, you can see that the mic is quite close. I mean, if I put my hand into the playing position, I've got just enough space that my knuckle is not going to touch the mic. So it's in a rotten old place. I mean, and if you put that for most guitar players, at some point they are going to whack the microphone. So this is too close really, but it's a really good exaggeration of the type of sound we'll get. So if I play a little bit nearer the bridge to get my hand out of the way, you should be able to see what's going on. So on this camera here, it's a bit more sensible shot, and you can see the relationship to where my fingers are actually going to twang the strings and the sort of sound that you're going to hear. So if we use sort of open strings, I mean, if I play just an A minor chord, and I'll play it with my thumb, because that's also going to be the darkest type of sound, isn't it? So the mic here is straight into the sound hole, and in real terms we're probably talking about 75 millimeters, 3 inches or so from the sound hole. So it's pointing straight into the cavity of the guitar. I don't usually use a pick. I've got really tough fingernails, so if I do the same sort of thing using my fingernails, now if I play really loud, the loudest I can probably play with that finger. So, see what I mean? So that's the sound that you're going to get from the sound hole on the guitar. And it is a sort of useful sound, but it does sound a bit boomy. It does sound a bit sort of forced in the tone. So the other position that people always talk about is the fingerboard. Now, on an acoustic guitar, of course, I mean, the sound hole in general, it may well have an inch or two of land in between the end of the neck and where the sound hole is. I mean, on some guitars it could actually be slightly further towards the bridge, but on this particular one, I mean, the neck touches the sound hole, so you've actually got hole, neck. Now if I just move this microphone to favour the neck position, we don't have to do it by very much. So now I'm pointing more at the neck. So if I just do the same thing with my fingers, and the same thing with the nail, So it's a different sort of sound altogether, isn't it? Now, this is where it starts to get a bit complicated, because if you stick two microphones and you've got one aiming at the neck sort of position, around about where the octave mark is here, then what you're going to get is that brighter, more percussive sound. Now, what happens if that's wrong as well? So you bung another microphone out, you stick it somewhere else, and you blend the two together. Now, if you put two mics on a guitar, one pointing at the sound hole, one pointing at the sort of more neck side of the guitar, it is not a stereo recording, because stereo recordings are supposed to give your two ears worth of where things are. So that if you're watching someone play the guitar, your two ears tell you space. They don't tell you sort of automatically a proper stereo signal. So neck on one side, totally. Sound hole on the other side, totally, is horrible to listen to, because you get this sort of strange divide between the two. It doesn't sound real. So what most people would do, instead of choosing all left and all right and then shoving the two faders at the same point, what they do is they put them a little bit one way from centre on one mic, a little bit one way from centre on the other mic, and adjust the two faders till you get a really nice balance. So that's stereo. But we'll actually do some stereo recording of guitars in the next video. But for this video, what I want to concentrate on is how differences in the placement can actually help or hinder. So at the moment, I've got the microphone going sort of diagonally across. So the sound hole is quite well, it's about probably 80 degrees as a line from the on-axis sound. And on a cardioid, by the time we get to about 70 degrees and start to increase that, the amount of pickup to the side starts to decrease. But what actually happens if we put the microphone on the other side? So here, I've put the microphone, and remember, I've exaggerated the distances a bit, so what we've actually got here is far too close, because it would be really easy for me to hit the mic if I start to play anywhere near the octave. So for the experiment, what I've got is the closest thing to the mic is probably 16 fret, something in that region is the closest point to the microphone. So the 16th fret, yeah, okay. But it's facing up here. But of course it's got a grazing view of the sound hole as well. So that's a different tone yet again, because we've actually got a bit of the sound hole in the more neck sounding position. That's with the thumb. So that's working sort of across the sound hole. What happens if we do it the other side? So if I move it right over this side, now this time, again, exaggerated for effect, but we've got the microphone almost above the bridge. So the main part of its pickup is going to be the loudest part here, the bit where I'm probably going to touch the strings. Now, my hand is in the way, so my hand will mask some of that. But this time, it's aiming at the sound hole, but also in the sort of frame of reference is this part of the fingerboard. So that's a slightly different sound again. So with my thumb, and if I use my nails, you can hear the noise. The same thing would happen, of course, with the pick. So that's actually 4 separate tones from the one mic, just by changing whether it goes straight in or grazes across the guitar at an angle. So the only sensible way to actually find out which is best for you is probably to stick a pair of headphones in, and while you're experimenting with the mic position, just listen to what the changes are. So especially if you've got a pair of sealed headphones, you're not getting any of the room sound in, you put those on, turn them up a little bit, and then experiment with the different sort of tonality that each position has got. And this particular position here, if you liked that one, but you also liked one at this side going in, you've sort of got these sort of crossed microphones. But don't get into the habit of thinking that crossed microphones are going to give you stereo if you use two of them. They give you two channels. What you do with it is up to you, but I think stereo, as in closing your eyes and being able to point at something, just doesn't work, because the guitar is the only thing that's in the sort of frame. So don't get into the habit of thinking just because you're using two mics you've got stereo, because it just isn't. It's two channels, and you tweak it to make it sound good. I mean, there's no real rule that says you can't put bags of EQ on one and have opposite EQ on the other. So if the sound hole isn't dark enough, you can trim off the HF end and make it dark and murky. And on your finger side, you can turn up the HF and take away the low frequencies. You could exaggerate the effect loads. It works perfectly well. Next thing, of course, is what we should do is do the same sort of thing, but from a more usual distance where the player's got room to put hands in. So now I've increased the distance and I've got plenty of hand room between the mic and the guitar. And the same test again, thumbs first. And if I do loud, so that's going at the sound hole from a bit of an angle. So let's now do directly at the sound hole to try and lose a little bit of this side. So this time we've got the mic still at a reasonable distance, but it's aiming straight into the sound hole. Thumbs first then. Okay, that's okay. How about this time we now just focus a little bit on the neck. So let's get that distance sorted out. It's a little bit close still. So there we go. So that's plenty of working space for hands. So now we've got the mic pointing more at the string end of the guitar and still at a reasonable distance, so we can wave hands in between and not bash the microphone. Sort of a more useful position, you know. You're not going to have to stop a take and do it again because they whack the mic. Starting with the thumbs. And with my nail. So that's directly at the soundboard, and we'll move the mic to its final position, which is probably about over the 5th fret, but pointing back towards the sound hole. So again, it makes a difference to the sound, and you can see on this one that while we do have quite a lot of the sort of finger noise, we also get the slightly more mellower sound that comes from the sound hole area. So that's another variation of 4 distinct positions, each one having a little bit or not so much of a certain area of the guitar. In the next video, I'll use a Zoom recorder with the built-in crossed coincident pair mics that are so popular. And we know that they do good stuff because we've all heard Jimmy Quango's videos, and Jimmy Quango just uses a nice guitar. He uses a nice recorder with a couple of built-in mics and some nice reverb, and because he plays so well, everything he does sounds really good. And this is just to prove that we could probably all do it if we learnt to play the guitar properly, because I don't think if you're an average player like me, there's not very much I can do with mic placement to make me any better. It's just how it is. A good player with modest equipment put in the right place can do amazing things. So there we go. I hope this was of some use, and if you come back to part 2, which I'll try and get done pretty quickly, we'll have a look at the stereo version of the same thing. Look after yourselves. Take care.